And can I thank everybody for coming out this evening on what is a very cold and very windy evening. I'm sure we're going to have an absolutely fascinating talk this evening about Little Shelford's wonderful manor house. I think most of you know our speaker this evening, David Jones. And David is probably one of the most passionate people about Little Shelford's history. Certainly it's the village, if not wider as well. So David, over to you.
Is that it? I thought you might keep going for another 5 minutes.
That's your job.
While I mentally adjust. So I learned something very important at Christmas. If David sends you a WhatsApp saying, what are you doing on the 18th of February? And I think, oh, it must be a party or something. Yeah, I'm free. He then sent a WhatsApp back saying, good, you're doing a talk at the History Society on the Manor House. So having started my retirement on the 1st of January, I've spent about 5 days working on and researching this presentation.
Thank you, David.
But anyway, yes. Well, I hope you'll find it worthwhile to listen to. And I'm rather hoping there's a second part of this. I think David's in luck. He might end up with another presentation, maybe next year, on more about the people who've lived in the Manor House over the years. I started that research, and it was really fascinating. I've got a few to pull out and talk to you about, but there's more to do on that. But the primary purpose of this was talking about the Manor House itself. So, yes, David's done my introduction. I live on High Street in a thatched cottage. I'm really thrilled about the prospect of rethatching and how economic that will be. And I've been here since '97, and I've done a couple of talks because my interest in local history was triggered by the discovery of the Henry Worthersley 3rd Earl of Southampton bell at All Saints Church. But I've talked a lot about that at previous meetings, so I'm not going to dwell too much on that today. So, what I'm going to cover today, and we're talking about the manor or the hall, because often when I speak to people in the village, particularly those who have only been here recently, the last 30 years, they get a bit confused as to what we're talking about. Hall, manor house, what are you talking about? What's where? So there's a bit of a test. Then talking about the manor buildings. Okay? So as far as we can establish, there were 3 phases of manor buildings. Okay? Up to and including the current manor. And then something about the manor occupants, a few oddball stories associated with that, and then your input and questions, particularly on recent history. So I've already had a few chats with people where they've talked about events, incidents to do with the manor house, the people who live in the manor house. It'd be lovely to hear your stories, because I'm a big fan on capturing people's memories and stories of life in the village before the inevitable facts, as I will and everybody else will, we expire. And we should do more to capture knowledge and experiences and history in the village. Try and repeat the work of the marvellous Fanny Whale in terms of capturing all that she could establish about the history of the village. So, which building? Now, because you're at the History Society, I'm expecting 100% result on the quiz question, right? So, is this the house I'm talking about tonight? No, anybody think it is? Excellent, then you've met my expectations of 100%. That's the hall. There's a whole series of different stories associated with that and history, and that's obviously connected with the Whale family. And it's good to see Jane here tonight, who knows all about that history as well. We're talking about this one. This is the Manor House. And if you've never walked down Manor Road for fear of being shooed away, because it's a private road, as you walk down to the rectory on the right, you can see through the trees this Georgian manor house. And that's the subject of tonight's talk. I thought I'd start by just thinking about the location of the manor house and some interesting observations around it. And David's said I can't go on longer than 2 hours, so I'm just going to put my watch on here. So, that was a joke, don't worry. If I stay for 2 hours, the pub will have shut, so that will be no good. So, two of the early maps that we've got. First of all, the enclosures map, which I think is the earliest map we have, I think. And on that one, you can see, which button do I press? That one, oh yeah. You can see here the river, and you can see here Shelford Hall, so that's the other major house in the village, and then you can see the manor house, okay? And obviously the church is here, so this is Manor Road, that's where Priest House is, or was, no, sorry, Priest House is, not was, is, and then down the Manor Road you'd go to the farm and so on, but the manor house was here. I just want you to observe, I'm nervous, so my hand is shaking, which is not great at this point. Just to observe that according to that map, there is a moat all around the site of the manor house on that map. Okay, now this is, I think actually this is 1900, this map. I couldn't find an exact date in Fanny Wells' book. But I think it's 1900 because you can see the railway is in place, and the railway opened up in about 1850, and she was writing the book about 1900, so I suspect it's 1900. But again, here's the hall, the other house. There's the church, the rectory, and there's the manor house. And here, she has drawn in a moat again. And we'll explore more about that later. This also shows one sort of building for the manor house. And that isn't quite right, actually. The manor house has one main building, which is the photograph you saw, of the Georgian four-storey, classic Georgian-style house. And then there are two outbuildings joined by walls, curtain walls, both to the south and the north of the main building. They're generally covered by trees, but I will show you some pictures of those and talk a bit about those as well. Okay, so that's the map, so you just know where it is in your minds and relative to the river. So obviously these are the river branches and the Miller's Cut there. So the manor house is the three distinct buildings. First of all, when is the manor house first mentioned in Little Shelford? The first mention of the manor house is in very old court documents in the late 13th century. So I think it's about 1280. So Little Shelford Manor House, near the river, north of the bridge and church. And the manor house is described as including a hall, two parlours, and great and little chambers. So, not enormous by its description, but substantial nonetheless for its time. And we have no idea what it might have looked like, so let's do some speculation. I looked to try and find manor houses of a similar age in Cambridgeshire that might give us some sense of what it might look like. And this is Northborough Manor on the Cambridgeshire-Lincolnshire border, just outside Peterborough. And it is very much domestic medieval architecture, so built between 1330 and 1340. So that would chime quite well with the period when our manor house was being built. And we mustn't forget that Little Shelford, in the Domesday Book in 1886, in 1086, is recorded as having a church and a monastery. So speculatively, they would be stone buildings, and there's evidence in the church of Saxon masonry. So I believe there would be stone buildings, and there's no reason why we wouldn't have had a stone manor house at this time. So that's the first building, long since gone. Then we have what is loosely described in Fanny Wells' book and elsewhere as the Elizabethan manor house. Now, when you look actually at the records of sales and purchases, it can never have been an Elizabethan house, because the building of this new house didn't start until the early 1600s. And when did Queen Elizabeth die? 1603. So it is highly unlikely that this is Elizabethan, and actually if you look at the style, it is much more in the influence of Jacobean, in my opinion. Not that I'm an architectural historian, but that feels to me like more of a Jacobean house. It was, however, built in the early quarter of the century, of the 17th century, and it was built on the site of the previous manor house. And as you'll know from the history, if you've listened to my other talks, the manor house itself was acquired from a chap called John Banks, who had bought the manor shortly before, and Toby Pallavicino, built the house to accommodate his style. He was a playboy. He was the son of Horatio Pallavicino, one time the richest man in Elizabethan England, who lived in Babraham House at the time. He died in 1600. So his son, Tobias Toby, inherited the lot, and apparently was a bit of a playboy and a bit of a spendthrift. But he did manage to hold on to his estates until later on in the 1600s. And he built this splendid house for himself. Now, what is it like? Well, this representation we'll come to in a minute, but as you can see from here, whoops, mouse to the buttons. As you can see from here, it was quite big. It had 25 hearths when they did the hearth tax survey in 1666, or was it 62? 62, okay. I should read what I've written. It had 25 hearths. And when I looked up what the measure of hearths was like, basically it said, well, if you've got 25 hearths, you are verging on stately home. It's impressive. And again, thinking about it, look at the number of chimneys with triple, and there's some there's there. This house had a lot of hearths, hence the higher hearth tax charge. So it was quite an impressive house. So Hatfield House there was more impressive. Used to host the king. So Hatfield House has 71 hearths, so that's a really big, just for comparison. Now we also know from other research and evidence that this chap, the Earl of Southampton, lived in the manor house as a guest of Toby, on and off many times between 1606 and 1615. Now he was one of the highest ranked earls in England, so he wouldn't want to stay in some little squat down in Royston where King James was, so he seems to have appended himself to the nearest significant manor house, which is ours in Little Shelford. And the proof of him being here, I've mentioned the bell, but also his son was baptised in 1608. In the church is in the parish baptismal records. And there are actually 3 servants of his that are recorded as being buried at All Saints as well. One in 1609 and 2 in 1615. And when you look at the parish records, it's quite funny because everybody else says, Fred Bloggs. And you've got Fred Bloggs, servant of the Earl of Southampton. So they're very keen to record for posterity that somebody of some note, or this person worked for somebody of some note. It's quite interesting looking at that. This painting is purported to be of the house. I say purported to be because we actually can't prove its provenance. We know in Fanny Wales' book, she definitely refers to it as a portrait of the Jacobean house. But actually, until we can find the painting, the original painting, it's very difficult to be 100% sure of its provenance. But let's run with it. And I say let's run with it for a reason I'll explain in a minute. But if you want to get your bearings on this, according to Fanny Whale, this is looking from the river, looking south. So this is the back of the Jacobean Manor House, with a moat all around, swans gliding by on the river. People who look far more Jacobean than Elizabethan, roaming round the garden, fountains, little bridge, and the house. And you can see Mako over here, All Saints Church. So actually, if that direction is correct, then that would be All Saints Church. The Lokes have been kind enough to let me walk around the manor house recently. I'll show you some photographs on that later. Not the interior, but the exterior, which is actually historically the most interesting. And it's interesting that they are not convinced that this is the house, and actually they think that this might be the view from the north, and that that is Great Shelford Church. But we'll look at that a bit more and ponder it. Okay, so that's the Jacobean house. And actually, just to build on that, there's a bigger picture of the Jacobean house painting, again with All Saints and a reflection across it, some of the outbuildings, and also the moat running up here. And there's the map, the Fanny Whale map. So you've got the north, the south, the east and the west. So according to Fanny Whale, you are standing with your back to the river there and looking in that direction. So then you would get All Saints to the left. Imogen Loke thinks it might be actually the other way around and looking to, is that the east? Yes, looking to the east and looking across, and therefore having Great Shelford Church in the background. Conjecture, as I said, until we have some more provenance around the picture, it's difficult to be 100% sure. Well, like most of history, I suppose, difficult to be 100% sure on anything. It's a fine painting and interesting, and I think there's probably 70% probability that it is a representation of the house, but of course it's a painting, not a photograph. So lots of imagination might have been applied to it as well, in terms of its look. And actually this whole point of the description is summarised in Fanny Whale's book. So I've, with wizardry, turned the map round so that that is now representing what she's saying in here. So the house on the west side, a road came over a bridge up to the steps at the front entrance door, so that's beyond here. But the bridge is now covered under a very large circle of turf surrounded by the road, and moat is filled in here and also on the north side, and all the walls and fountains are gone. That's true when you walk around the house. But the swans are meant to be on the river. And yes, there is a dam that Pavlicino built as well, but that seems to be not connected with a mill or anything. Actually seems to be more connected with a dam to help fill the moat and keep the moat filled, and also to provide a bathing pond with deeper water as well. Seems to be some evidence of that. Now, interestingly, look, where did this painting come from? It was in the possession of a Miss Finch. And keep that in mind, because it kind of helps with the provenance to some degree, and I'll come on to that in due course. Okay, so now to the Georgian Manor House. So the Jacobean Manor House was largely demolished in 1750. That phrase is quite important, largely demolished. That hints of the fact that there must be some elements of the Jacobean house still in existence. And it was replaced by a new house, a plain central block of 5 bays, so it's talking about that block there. Materials from the old house, including Pallavicino's coat of arms, were incorporated into 2 pavilions joined by curving walls. And this central Georgian block was built in 46 to 50. These two, no specific dates, although I think this one here, which is used as a garage now, is later. That could potentially actually be related to the Jacobean house. In 45, there was an internal fire which damaged a lot of the internals of the building. A lot of the Georgian oak panelling and so on, unfortunately, was destroyed, apparently, which was a shame. But as I said, quite right, it's a private house, so I didn't want to press to be invited inside. Apparently, I'm told it's just quite modern. It's kind of like quite a modern house. Nothing too much. So let's have a look at some pictures of the manor house today and have a few discussions about this magical phrase, materials from the old house, including the Pallavicino coat of arms, were incorporated. Right, so these pictures were all taken by me a week last Monday, I think. Where are we? Wednesday? Was it this Monday? I don't know. It's all a blur. I've been very busy doing this. So this is the wall of this building here, which is used now as a garage. So this outer building here, this is the back wall, and lo and behold, there is a coat of arms of somebody, but who? Also of interest, a note here is there is a fireplace, clearly what would have been an internal fireplace, protruding out of the wall. So there must have been a building for that to have been built and for an internal fireplace to have been put there. So that raises some interesting questions about the provenance of this building. The other thing I'd point out is some of the brickwork. It's pretty clear that some of this brickwork is very old and probably of also a Jacobean age. I think you can see that quite often as you look around. The other thing to point out, as English Heritage noted, that they point out from their listing that there's evidence of the older house. So, walking around with Imogen, we thought these 2 doors were the obvious examples of doors that predated the Georgian manor house. This one is in the side, again in the side of this building. This one is a gate in the garden wall going out further along the river to where the bathing pool and so on would have been. So these are very old doors. So, let's move on. What's this all about then? What's this here? Is it or is it not the coat of arms of the said Pavlicini family? So that's a close-up of what's on the wall. Rather interestingly, in Fanny Wales' book, there is a drawing of the coat of arms, which is clearer, but that, as you can see, is sitting on the front doorstep. So it wasn't attached to the wall when that drawing was done by Fanny Wale, which is where sketch of the Pavlicini coat of arms was painted by Fanny Wale in 1912 on the west and drawbridge side of the manor house. So, is that the Pavlicini coat of arms? Again, discussing it with Imogen, she said, well, given the story, one of the families that lived in the house in the last 200 years might have thought, well, it's quite a good thing, isn't it, to be associated with history. So maybe we'll have a coat of arms made and put in the house. It's difficult to prove anything, absolutely. But I did manage to find the Pavlicini coat of arms. He came from the Genoa branch of the Pavlicini family. The Pavlicini family is a very historic, ancient Italian family. There are two branches of it, and Toby was part of the Genoa branch. To me, that's close enough. Can I guarantee that that coat of arms once hung in the second manor house, the Jacobean manor house? No. Is it the coat of arms of the Pavlicini family of Genoa? Yes, in my view. Do people agree? Does that look similar enough? Otherwise, it's not a very exciting coat of arms, is it? You think they'd have gone for something a bit more exciting with antlers and deer and all the usual stuff. But anyway, so to that extent, Fanny Wale's right. The arms of the Pavlicini family still reside in the manor house. Now, let's go back to another thing that's repeated in the Fanny Wale book. And I think we all know that Fanny Wale did a fantastic job of collecting all these thoughts, memories and histories in the book. But we also know there is some latitude because she wouldn't have had written records, she didn't have the internet, she was writing a lot of hearsay or, down in the book, which is quite understandable that things just aren't quite right. But here is a picture of the indomitable Elizabeth Finch, who at the time was living in Church Street. This is meant to be a picture of either her father or her grandfather. And the reason it's important is that the Finch family were the family that bought the Jacobean house, demolished that central part of the Jacobean house and built the Georgian house. Okay, so that's an important link, the fact that Mrs. Finch had a painting. If you read the Fanny Wale book, it says it is that the painting is hanging up in this room where Fanny Wale sketched her. She talks about the fact, doing the sketch, the Pavlicino painting, the Jacobean house painting was hanging on the wall, along with this picture of her father or grandfather. So that helps in terms of the provenance of the painting. What doesn't help is her claim that it was built by Inigo Jones. Okay, now there's a slight problem with that because the house was rebuilt between 1746 and 50, by which time Inigo Jones had popped his clogs. So it is unlikely that Inigo Jones designed the house, and frankly, it doesn't look like an Inigo Jones house particularly. No, he designed Somerset House, for goodness sake, and Covent Garden. So there's no porticos or Roman columns or anything like that. So unlikely. maybe it was just a mishearing and that maybe it was a follower of Inigo Jones who did the design of the house. But anyway, doesn't really matter, but it's an interesting sort of counterplay to the contents and the stories in Fanny's book about the house itself. So that was very interesting to look at that and put two and two together on the role of Elizabeth Finch. So let's go back to the house and the Jacobean house and evidence of what's described in this picture that's represented in what we see today, beyond those photographs I've already shown you. So here are the two old maps again. So here's Fanny Wales' 1900 map showing she has sketched in what she thinks would be the place of the moat. There's this moat extension here that would have led to the rest of the moat. Then she believes there was a moat round the front of the house with a drawbridge and a moat round the back. It is interesting that the 1813 enclosure map shows exactly the same thing. That must be evidence for the fact that there must be some kind of moat present around the house. The question is, did it run around the entire house? This is the English Heritage Listing map. Okay, so there's the manor house, and as you can see, this is the river, that branch of the river, the western branch of the river, and it doesn't show any kind of moat around the house. It does usefully show the two outbuildings, one there and one there. And this here is a sort of portico, a veranda where the families would sit in the summer looking out towards the river. So what could we see when Imogen and I were wandering around having a look at the grounds? Well, this is the view just a few days ago, and those snowdrops are just fantastic. They line the whole house up and down. It's just brilliant. And they're all over the paddock as well. This is looking to the left. So let me just point out these photos. Obviously, this was as I was walking down to the manor to meet Imogen. There's what I think is the older of the outbuildings. I think that actually is still part of the Jacobean house. You'd have the one I pointed out before, which is now a garage on the right, and then the central house. But these curtain walls joining those two buildings. So that's looking down the drive. And as you can see, it's completely flat. In fact, I'm told they used to have village fetes there in earlier times before it moved to the old rectory, now priest house.
I remember the old rectory.
Yeah. And also, I was talking to somebody who remembers when they had a house sale, when the Daniel family, or is it Lord Daniel or Sir Daniel, I can't remember his name, come to it later. There was a house sale of all the contents, and they put a marquee up on that front lawn as well. But there is no sign of a moat. There's not even any inundation, no collapsing or sunken ground that would indicate something. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean there wasn't one. It just means they've done a very good job of infilling with hardcore if they've filled it in. And this is standing at the bottom end, so around about there, looking in the other direction up the drive. It's all completely flat with very little inundations in the ground. And then this one here, this one's looking to the left. So I'm standing just in that corner of the house, looking towards this wall here. So that's looking out across this meadow here, across there, towards the road and the wall that runs across the road there, Bridge Lane. No sign of a moat coming round there either, from the look of the ground. So, is there any evidence there at all of sort of a moat? So if there's no evidence of a moat, then you begin to question the veracity of that painting of the Jacobean house. Well, there's reasonably good news. First of all, two views. This is the view with my back to the river, looking at the back of the house. You'll notice that actually the house is set up quite a height above the riverbank. And apparently they have very little trouble with flooding, other than the basement, the lower levels of the house, where the kitchen design used to be, do flood occasionally. But if you turned round from where I'm standing there, you'd see this view. So this is the river, and that's the view out to the island, because they have an island on their side of the house. That's an island because the other river branch runs in the distance. And that's the wall along Bridge Lane. So there's the river there, so actually they didn't need a moat at the back of the house because they had the river. But as you walk round the garden, coming out, so we were walking around here, and you come out there, you come across this. And it's still there. That's what this is. And it's full of water. And that clearly is a moat cut. That is an artificial branch built into the river to bring water. The river flows in that direction. So from Shelford, and it would fill, and does fill, when the river's flowing well, this moat cut. So that element of a moat definitely exists. The challenge is, without getting in the time team, exploring whether the moat surrounded the building. But that's encouraging because there's at least evidence that there was an artificial moat constructed at the house. Other things that we observed that are interesting are, first of all, again, this is a view towards this wall here. Okay? And you'll note that there's this lower level of brick, which is then topped by newer brick. And this is the brick level that again looks, well, to me, Jacobean or Elizabethan. We don't know what the structure of the prior house before Pavlicini turned up was. It may be that that was brick, in which case, of course, they wouldn't do what the builders do here and just cart it all away. They would actually reuse whatever they could. So lots of evidence of very old building materials being used. And that's the door that I showed you a close-up of, so the door into the land beyond the garden. So very interesting and ancient brickwork in the walls. Here there was a huge dip in the garden, so that is about here and about there in that picture. Maybe that line indicates something to do with the height. But the view is that that was a very large fish pond. So in Jacobean times that would have been a fish pond fed by apparently there's a small ditch or culvert that would have topped up the pond, and that would have provided fish for food in Jacobean times, and as the years went by would provide a pond for ornamental frogs and ducks and what have you, I guess. So that was also interesting. And then finally, this is a view here from about there towards this outbuilding. And this outbuilding, I think, is the most interesting. As you can see, again, lots of these very old bricks. And those old bricks are also very much integral to the fabric of that building. And if you read the English Heritage Statement about the two outhouses, they're the buildings that they refer to as having obvious signs of 17th century brickwork, fittings, beams, etc. So it is possible that those elements of the house actually existed at the time of the Jacobean house, and then the Jacobean house was either demolished or burnt down, and the new house, the Georgian house, was built to replace it. Okay, any questions on those pictures?
Just
Yeah,
make an observation when you're looking at the front, looking for evidence at the front.
yeah,
If you, the wall that runs alongside Bridge Lane
yeah,
is much higher
yeah,
on the manor side than it is Bridge Lane side,
yeah,
which would seem to indicate that maybe when they built the basement, a lot of soil was deposited over that.
over that side, yeah, okay. Very true. And in fact, looking at this view, so this view is the river, their garden, the river, the island. Imogen did say that if you dig anywhere along this bank, you start digging up old bricks. So that's interesting in its own right, indicating maybe that wall in that painting did exist, but when they took it down, they didn't take everything away. But who knows? Again, we need to do a proper archaeological
The other thing
survey.
is that Graham did a very interesting talk a few years ago about where he thought the river had run.
Yeah,
And the river didn't go past the manor, it meandered across under the bridge, which is at an angle to the road.
yeah,
So his theory was that the river actually was heading in that direction. And after he gave us that talk, after a flood, I looked over the wall and you actually could see water laying in the depression in the line which he had indicated.
that he'd indicated, yeah. It is a mystery because Imogen has also been visited in years gone by quite a famous land archaeologist who looks at the land and the shapes in the land and determines what might have been going on. And he also had an interesting theory, maybe for another day, about the fact that the road to Hawkston didn't do this bizarre thing. He said it's completely bizarre that you get this weird, sharp, this junction we all hate, at the junction of Bridge Lane, Church Street, Whittlesford Road, is bonkers. Nobody would ever build a house like that. His theory was actually that the road to Hawkston used to run across the front of the manor house off in that direction, which would be much quicker to get to Hawkston than the current road arrangement. But who knows? We better not suggest that to the county council as a way of alleviating that junction, or East West Rail, yeah. So lots of interesting comments and more to be done. I also just say that, of course, that is a private residence, so please resist the temptation to go trooping around the garden. It won't be welcome. Maybe if you ever meet Imogen or a member of the family, ask if you can have a look.
David, are there any aerial photographs during summer droughts or anything like that?
Imogen said she had some, and they didn't show any obvious markings either. I wasn't able to find any online, but apparently they exist. I think there's a flurry of people who used to sell the pictures, didn't they? Used to fly over, take photographs, and you'd all get a leaflet saying, do you want to buy your overhead? She had some of those, and there was no obvious markings. For the moat, yeah. What about the people in the manor house then? What I've managed to do, this took a bit of effort, is actually take all the main sources about the manor and the manor house, both from the Victorian history, the Fanny Whale book, various other sources of documentation relating to the village and the manor. And with a little bit of help from AI, created this table in order in timing, chronological order of what was going on. And one of the interesting things is, and if anybody, I'm sure people don't read it, well, who knows. If you remember the last village magazine, the last quarterly magazine, I wrote an article about the Clay family. the fact they donated a Bible and a prayer book to the church. So we want to find out why. Discovered that he was the man who turned Cambridge University Press from a little local university print room into a massive financial empire that it became. Obviously that's how he made his money. But he had bought the manor. So he was lord of the manor, but he had not bought the manor house. So there's several occasions through this history actually, and that's why I've done the two columns, where the manor, so the lord of the manor title, manor farm and the manor farm land was owned by one individual, but the house was owned by another individual. And then, so several times they were split apart, and then several times they came back together again, which is interesting. In Clay's case, he bought the lordship of the manor. He had the farm being worked. His son would stay in the farmhouse sometimes with the people who were running the farm. But he was living in a grand house in West Road in the centre of Cambridge. So I guess he had no need for a manor house. So anyway, just you can have a look through this quickly, and of course the slides and everything will be available. If you want them, I was going to suggest to David, who tried to publish this chronological listing on the history site. But we've got the early times, so with the evidence we've got from the Domesday book, which tells us that this chap, Hardwin de Scalers, was given the Little Shelford Manor, amongst many others, and that the manor was held by six soccer men, which apparently are not people who play for Man United. They're not slaves, they're not serfs, they own and farm their own land. And it's a term that comes from the Danegeld, because this part of England was run, pre the invasion by the Normans, was run by the Vikings, by the Danes, as part of the Danegeld. So that was interesting. But we don't discover anything about the house until the manor house is recorded in the 13th century, and that's during the 300 years that the de Freville family were lords of the manor and clearly lived in a manor house on that site, presumably. Then the splits start to happen. So George Freville, who is probably the best known of the Freville family, Sir George Freville, sold the land to this chap called John Banks.
You say sold Little Shelford, is that the
No, Little Shelford Manor,
okay, right.
to John Banks.
Not the whole village.
No, well, probably was the whole village in those days, yes. So here we are, the split begins. So the Banks family retained the manor and the rest of the land, okay, until 1634, and later sold their second son, John, to Daniel Wigmore. John Banks sold the manor house, so he separated the manor house from the manor land, and he sold it to Tobias Pavlicino. We don't have a record of the exact date of the sale. We do know his father in Babraham died in 1600, so that's when he'd have inherited all the money. And therefore, that's why I don't think it could be Elizabethan, because I think the Jacobean house would have been built 1605, 1606, ready for the arrival of the Earl of Southampton. Smart new house for my new mate, the Earl of Southampton, who knows the king. Maybe he could pull in a few favours for me. Who knows? So the second part, we carry on going through how it goes from the Pavlicinos and the Banks into the nearer times, this John Gill and then Gilbert Wigmore. And here the manor house is combined by the Wigmores, so that the manor house and the land are rejoined. And so it keeps going on. Wigmore sold it to Roger Gillingham, and Gillingham sold the manor to William Finch. And that's the gentleman who in the early 1750s demolished the old house and replaced it with a new house. Okay. William Finch is worthy of a lecture in his own right. He came from Dudley, therefore he'd inevitably been a West Brom supporter. But clearly was one of the new up-and-coming industrialists making lots of money out of iron foundry. And actually I was looking information about him, and he built some of the first iron bridges over the Cam in Cambridge, and had a foundry on the site that is now the master of St John's College House. So on that site next to the river, he had a foundry and was making iron, which was being used, of course, as the economy improved and farm implements were improving, but he provided the iron to build the first 2 iron bridges over the River Cam, including, I think, the one that is there that runs up to Magdalen College, across from Bridge Street, across to Magdalen College. I think that is still his original bridge, potentially. Unless it fell down. I don't know. There's a picture of it on the website, so I'm thinking, oh, that convinces me. I'm easily convinced. William Finch had a big impact because he rebuilt the house. And that's why it's important, the provenance of that painting, because it was hanging on Mrs. Finch's wall when she lived no longer in the manor house, but lived on Church Street. Not quite sure where on Church Street, but would have been quite a substantial house. And then we have Clay buying the manor land and being recorded as the lord of the manor in the late 1800s. Then William Walton bought the manor in 1879 because both were for sale, but Clay bought let's have a look. It gets very confusing. So Law may have bought the lot and then sold the house and sold the manor to Clay. And so it goes on, and he was a famous mathematician, William Walton. And so it goes on, and John Clay was recorded as still being the lord of the manor in 1937, and it was after that it all gets a bit murky. We don't know. I could not establish who is the current lord of the manor. I asked one of the landowners of the land that would have been the manorial land, and they said they were not lord of the manor. I said, that's a shame. I was going to bow scrape and then ask you to give you a few £100,000 to the church to maintain the tower, but no, he denied it. Maybe that's why he denied it. But no, it's a mystery. We don't know who is currently, or whether the title even exists in any way at the moment. And then, of course, we come to the more recent families, which are better known, better recorded, including the Pears Wilsons, who were there for quite a long time, and Mrs. Wilson in her second marriage, and the current owners of the manor, Mr. and Mrs. Professor and Mrs. Charles Loke. I'm told by Imogen that Mrs. Loke believes she is lady of the manor. But she couldn't attest whether that was actually a formal title or her informal title. And they're willing to go and explore the deeds at some point to see if there's any clue of all that. Anyway, do you want 5 minutes on notables? Okay. Is that all right? Okay. There's quite a few. I won't spend much on each, but it was interesting. I get completely buried when I'm doing these talks. Of course, I keep going off on these, never mind building a moat, I keep going off on all these branch rivers when I discover things. So I started looking at the Domesday Book. And the Shelfords, because it was all grouped as one thing, appears 6 times because different people owned different bits of the village, the combined village at the time. And the most interesting fact was the fact that had a church and a monastery, and there are only 3 churches in Cambridgeshire recorded in the Domesday Book. And it was under the bishops of Ely and it had monks, and therefore was regarded as a monastery. Whether there was actually a separate monastery building, again, we wouldn't know unless we had archaeologists come in to look. And in 1066, when William turned up, the overlord was a lady called Editha. I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. So I discovered that she was the first wife of King Harold. And she was the richest woman in England. Whether she ever lived in a manor of that sort of nature on the site, who knows? Then there was Hardwin. I won't dwell on that too much. He was the first owner. He came over with King William as a trusty knight and went through several generations as the owner of the manor, and came from the Calais region of France. And then through marriage, the manor went to the Freville family, which I think I'll come on to later. Earl of Southampton, my favourite topic. I won't dwell on it because I think you've heard it enough times. But that's him in the Tower of London before King James became king and released him. He was there waiting to have his head chopped off, potentially, but it didn't happen. He'd upset Queen Elizabeth in her old age. Never a sensible thing to do. So lots of evidence that he was around here in these parts. Oh, wrong order. I should have had the Frevilles first. So the Frevilles were lords of the manor and lived in the manor house for 300 years. Okay? We know that they were here because it's well documented, but also we have the interesting fact that they're actual physical representations. We know what they look like-ish. Because Sir John de Freville here is the one cast or statue, whatever you call them. I don't know what the official terminology is for a statue that's lying down. Anybody know? Good, I'm not embarrassed then by my lack of knowledge. So he's buried there, and then in the side chapel, under the carpet, there are two brasses, and although somebody at some point, probably Cromwell's men or some Puritans, or somebody just wanted to make some money, stole the brass of the name and descriptions, we fortunately have some records from sort of the 1800s of who they were. So there was this one's Robert Freville, and this one is Thomas Freville, his son. So they were buried in that side chapel, and the side chapel was put there in honour of the Freville family, and we're meant to pray. Every time we walk past the statue of Sir John, we're meant to pray for his soul. That's what the inscription tells us to do. I'm usually busy praying for my own. Never mind his. But anyway, the Banks family, if you remember, they came in after the de Frevilles. Don't know much about him, apart from his widow inherited the manor, and for some bizarre reason, she put this brass plate up next to the side chapel, and it basically says, it's even written in English, it's even better, isn't it? That this was the chapel for the lords of the manor, the Frevilles, but now John Banks, her husband who died, and now her, Priscilla, the wife, and whose charge the transcribed plate was put in place. We don't know much about him, apart from the fact he came from just a landed family over in Babraham. But given when he moved over, maybe he was selling his land to Pavlicino, who was building up vast estates around Babraham Hall before his death. So it may be that he did a good deal with Pavlicino and used the money to buy the manor here. Then there are others. Daniel Wigmore, who was he hid away. He was Archdeacon of Ely, but he wanted to avoid the Civil War and any consequences from it, so he retired to the manor house. That would have been the old manor house. Then we get into, a little bit later, we get into the Finches. Now here's a little bit of excitement that I threw up doing the research. So the Finch family, as you saw, it was the Finch family, William Finch, who bought the manor and knocked it down and built the Georgian manor. And this is the 1841 census, and down here is a whole list of Finches and their servants, including the lady in the painting, but she's much younger here. I think she's 25. Elizabeth Finch is there. Elizabeth Finch, there we are, 25. And this is in 1841. And the Finch family became a very well-established, very well-known family. They lived in the village for quite a long time. And one of the Finches was Peter Finch, the famous actor. And the only actor to have been awarded an Academy Award, an Oscar, posthumously, because he died having made his final film for which he won an Oscar. There's a little known fact. And he came back to open the village fete, Little Shelford Village Fete, to help raise some money, to raise money for the church restoration in 1954. You were there.
Yeah. Saw him do his little speech.
He did a little speech. Excellent.
From the vicarage step.
Excellent. That vicarage being the priest house. Yeah, priest house. Yeah. So there's a little unknown fact that actually Imogen tipped me off that she knew there was a connection to Peter Finch. So I researched it and found it. So this long line of Finches, he never lived here. He lived in Australia, actually. But was still, so many of the family was so connected for so long with the village, rather like the Weld family, that he was willing to come back and do this, which is quite nice of him, really. The other interesting thing is on this list here, there's this other chap over here. Just so I can read it. I noticed that this chap here, described as a freeman, became the next owner of the manor house. Not a freeman, he's described as a yeoman, which I'd have thought, in 1841 was a bit of a past it phrase, but apparently not. This is James Eden Law, who became owner of the manor house. And in this he's a yeoman. And apparently a yeoman is the lowest level of the gentry. So it's minor gentry, apparently, owns land, farms it, doesn't yet have a big house. So I need to do some more research on how he went from a yeoman into an owner of the manor house at some point. The Walton family then moved in 1879, the Walton family. So he was a famous mathematician, Fellow of Trinity Hall, Magdalen College, mathematician, author of several mathematical books, had very, very noticeable features, immense white beard and flowing white hair. It sounded like Gandalf to me, but anyway. A very well-known Cambridge academic in his time, so more research to be done on that. And then when he died, his daughters, including Miss Mary Walton, lived in the manor house. There's a rather sad story to this, actually. It's a little bit sensitive, so I'm going to be careful about how I say this, but she clearly, the daughters, and we think this is her, because Imogen shared that photograph with me and said she knows that a Walton relative who came to visit them in the manor house to share some photographs with them, shared this one with them. And he said, now I've seen the house, I know that these are taken. These are my Walton ancestors taken at this house. So that just confirms everything. He was doing his own research. But look, notice what's perched at the top of the steps. The coat of arms. So that's taken then, I think, at a similar time to when that drawing was done. Now, very sadly, and there were some really fun things going on when they were there. They were hosting wounded Belgians during World War I. There were sort of funny anecdotes with attempted burglaries and one thing and another, which I won't go into now, and David talks about one of them at his last talk. But sadly, then, at some point in 1916, they were forced to leave the house, I suspect, just through running costs. They couldn't keep it going. So they moved out and sold the house. And then, unfortunately, a year later, March 1917, Miss Caroline Walton, then living at Lindley House, Great Shelford, left her home at 6:50 and was found drowned. She had been depressed ever since she left Little Shelford Manor, a house to which she was very much attached. She was aged 61, so really quite sad. They'd obviously grown up in the house with their father, loved the house, loved the grounds, and then sadly, somehow, she ended up taking her own life or fell in the river or whatever. And if you look on the website, you'll find that she features, if you look for the copy of the old Little Shelford Parish Guide, published in 1989, she features in one of our very few ghost stories. And apparently soon seen hovering through the churchyard on her way back from her grave to the manor house. Read the article. Anyway, it's nonetheless a sad story, and also shows how lovely the manor house is. Then on to the Pears Wilsons, who are almost the most recent occupants. Lived there quite a long time. Not for when they were married, but not long after, so the early mid-1920s. They're the only person I've researched who pop up most commonly in copies of the Tatler. So clearly, I was trying to work out who was the one with all the money, and it does look like it was Beatrice Worsley. This is odd, I need to research this, because that sounds rather like the Earl of Southampton's name. Ooh, intrigue. But anyway, but you can see she's of independent means, whereas his father was a doctor up in Lancashire. So anyway, that's him in 1931, and that's her in 1931 at a house party in Dunfermline. This is presented to me earlier just to show the technology works. Who gave me this? Oh yes, yeah. Your name was? John. John gave me this picture that was taken in 1960 of Mrs. Pears Wilson opening the church fete in front of Priest House. So then she was a widow because sadly Mr. Pears Wilson, who was a very well-known horseman, and he ran the South Cambs hunt for years, he fell off his horse and died, which was rather sad. He was also a church warden, so that's his memorial stone in the church. So for a while, 3 years or so, Mrs. Pears Wilson was a widower, sadly. But then, Mr. Pear Wilson's Mr. Pear Wilson's brother-in-law came forward and made a proposal of marriage to her. So he married her, so it became Sir Charles and Lady Daniel, who were the last residents of the manor house before the current Wokes family. I haven't put in print some of the stories I've heard about Sir Charles, but we'll maybe come to that another day. He used to get his chauffeur to drive him to the pub on the corner of Church Street and Hawkston Road, which was then called the Prince Regent. His chauffeur would be park outside. Sir Charles would go in to have a drink with his friends, but the landlord would come out with a pint for his chauffeur. So that was an interesting story I heard about that. I don't think it's a story, I think it's fact. And there's another thing that Mrs. Pears Wilson was famous for, both before her husband died and after. She was a famous breeder of Cockle Hill Cavaliers. And Imogen said when they came to look round the house, she remembers coming with her parents, and the top floor was full of kennels or cages for where all the Cockle Hill Cavaliers were being bred. And then at the front of the house to the left, there are a whole series of sheds where the adult Cockle Hill Cavaliers were stored, were kept until they were sold, I guess. So interesting stories there as well. So there we are. I'm sorry I've gone on a bit, but hopefully you found that interesting. Hopefully there's not too many incorrect facts amongst that lot. What I would love you to do, I mean, I use all the sources I can. Lots of the history books, the local history books, of course. The one source that's invaluable, although you have to check everything, but the one source that's invaluable is Fanny Wells' amazing book. If you haven't got one yet of this version, which is very readable, let David know. He can tell you where to get hold of one.
But thank you. I found that really interesting. Can we give David a round of applause, please?